impossible. There is so much to ask and ponder right now as we look at the conflict in Ukraine and conflicts elsewhere. Let's remember that too. Lots to discuss, so let's begin. We all know, the pain the world is in right now. We've been speaking about it a lot so far. I want to put my first question to you, President Julius Maada. The entire global headlines right now are focused on Ukraine. But your continent has seen many wars, many conflicts. Do you think there is a double standard by the international community and by the media?
Thank you very much. And for sure, yes, there is. In the midst of what is happening in Europe with regards to war, we see how people of our color, Africans, are being discriminated against, even as refugees. So we feel sorry for the situation and yet feel sad about our own situation, that even in the midst of such misery, we are still discriminated against as if we are not human beings. So there is double standard. And most of the problems, the challenges with security and peace around the world is actually as a result of double standards that we see. Certain events are better covered by the media, and others are not covered at all. And when they are covered, it is tweaked in such a way that it's in favor of certain situations. So we are part of the world, and we want to feel part of the world. But we feel that even in the midst of trouble, misery, because you have my color, I get to a gate, and they say, no, we don't want you. We feel bad about that. And I think this being a very beautiful forum, it's a right platform for us to express our displeasure about that. This is double standard that is not helping the emerging and evolving issues in security around the world.
And what does it take, President, then to get rid of those double standards for Africa, 54 countries, to get that same global attention from the international community that Europe is getting right now, that Ukraine is getting right now?
Well, we have been fighting for this for so long, from the slave trade to now. For instance, Africa, 1.2 billion people, we stay fighting to have a seat, just a seat, at the UN Security Council. 1.2 billion people. And 75% of the decisions at the Security Council concern Africa, and yet we have no voice there. So if we don't have a voice there, and we are ringing the bells of democracy all around the world, that there should be democracy in every institution. So we know that this is double standard. We are paying a lip service to democracy, but we don't really mean it. Otherwise, at the UN Security Council by now, we should have had a change. And I think President Erdogan beautifully referred to that situation. We are in 5 countries decide the fate of the whole world. We are only there to raise our hands, and they are not even counted at the end of the day. So if we have to have a world that is peaceful, I think we should be treated as human beings, just human beings, not just to be treated as objects. And I think we have been advocating for that. I am the chairman of the African Union Committee of 10, advocating for and canvassing for a position too at the UN Security Council.
And how is that going? Are you seeing any progress?
Well, the gatekeepers cannot let us in. They cannot let us in. We have been advocating, and we are talking about 1.2 billion people.
1.2 billion people, 54 countries, and as you say, this is a subject that's very close to the heart of the President of Turkey. He regularly says the world is bigger than five. How do you change that? How do you get into the UN Security Council to really, as this topic says, change that pathway, that structure to peace and prosperity on your continent and many other places in the world?
If we have to talk about peace and security around the world, we should also talk about equal rights for everybody. If we don't feel we are part of it, we don't have a stake in it, that is why sometimes things go wrong. So we want to feel part of the world. We don't want to be at the receiving end of the many things that happen. I normally say the first, second, third industrial revolutions have come and passed, gone, and we Africans have been at the receiving end of all of these revolutions. The fourth is looming. If we are serious about an equal world with equal opportunities, where there is prosperity for everybody, we should also give that supporting environment to Africa so that Africa can also be a productive part of the fourth industrial revolution. That is looming. And for us to be part of that, we should be given the opportunity, put in that pole position so that we can be a meaningful part of that revolution. Otherwise, we will always be at the receiving end. And that is not good for security. Insecurity anywhere is insecurity everywhere. And this is what we have failed to realize. Because Afghanistan provided a base for Al-Qaeda, they used that base to go and attack around the world. Now we have in Africa in a situation where the Sahel region is insecure because of terrorist activities.
The contagion of coups is how we've been describing it.
The contagion of coups is actually one aspect. But then we have terrorists, I mean, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, Mali, and in the Sahel region. The complexity, the enormity of those security situations are such that they are beyond our scope as African nations are trying to develop to deal with them. But yet we have not had that sort of support. Again, talking about double standards. When we had the terrorists in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Syria, we saw the world mobilize coalitions to go and get rid of them. Now we are struggling every day to bring this to the attention. And the media, too, is not paying any attention. We have terrorism in Africa, north of the, in the Sahel region. And that is impacting us in the coastal regions of West Africa. We don't want to wait until we are overwhelmed before we can, jump again to go there and put the fire off.
Thank you so much, President. You raise so many valid points, and it's great to hear the perspective of the continent of Africa. And as you say, insecurity anywhere is insecurity everywhere. I want to turn to you, President Vjosa Osmani. How concerned are you right now that what's happening in Ukraine, that pain, could spill over into other countries, into neighboring countries, into other European countries very soon?
Well, first of all, I think the developments in Ukraine and certainly elsewhere in the world before Ukraine always remind us how sacred peace is, but also that we should not take it for granted. We should not just achieve it, but also maintain it and show perseverance in maintaining it, because representing a people, the people of Kosovo, that have seen the opposite of peace and how devastating it can be on the lives of the people and how much destruction it can cause, we're constantly struggling and engaging and working hard, not just within the country, but with allies and partners around the world to make sure that we do achieve peace in our region and beyond. And now with the events unfolding in Ukraine, with the current war that is again causing so much suffering for the innocent people of Ukraine, I believe that it is right to say that there is a growing concern in our region. There is especially a growing concern among those of us that are still not members of NATO, despite of our willingness to become a member of this organization, as well as a member of the European Union. So for that reason, we are working hand in hand and in full coordination with our allies in NATO and the European Union to make sure that we stop this spillover effect. Because I believe that if we look back at history and how Russia has been showing interest beyond the former USSR republics, beyond that region, the Western Balkans alongside the Baltics fall within those regions that they have continuously made efforts to destabilize them. In our region, it is unfortunate that they also use another country as a proxy, in this case Serbia, where they have been exerting quite a lot of influence, which has been growing in the past 10 years. And that is a growing concern, especially among some of us, as I said, because of the ongoing tensions as well as the efforts to destabilize our country. Obviously, we're doing everything in our capacity to stop this from happening. And so far we have been successful, but again, not taking peace for granted means that you have to work day and night, every single day of your work, with everyone that has the same intentions, which is peace, not hegemony, which is democracy, not autocracy, to make sure that we preserve it. Because after all, many people have said it before me, but I think it's important to point it out today. Peace is not only the absence of war, it's not only the absence of conflict, it's also creating equal opportunities for the people that you represent. It's also giving them economic opportunities that lead to prosperity, which is why I really believe that the topic that you have chosen for this panel, even if you just read that one sentence, says it all.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for your comments. Prime Minister Edi Rama, I want to put the same question to you. How concerned are you about a spillover into European countries, into neighboring countries, of the tensions, the conflict we're seeing in Ukraine right now?
By no doubt, what happened with the invasion of Ukraine is not just about Ukraine, and the resistance of the Ukrainians is more than resisting for their own country, but it's about resisting for values and way of life, these hours also. And of course, the Western Balkans, where we live, are a vulnerable part of the whole body of Europe, because it's a mix between NATO countries, non-NATO countries, and not only this, but between countries with different histories in terms of their alliances. And of course it's concerning, and I just came out from a meeting with President Erdogan, and we were discussing exactly about the need to preserve peace in the Western Balkans, the need to work closely among us in the Western Balkans, and the need to do everything we can to not allow that whatever influence or whatever idea might affect by whatever action the Western Balkans do not find space. And I believe that what we have already started as a process of opening the Balkan, of bringing the countries together for a better future, of implementing in our countries and between our countries, the four freedoms of Europe, was quite the right step to take while we see each other now in this situation. So it's very important to work hard to preserve what we have achieved, and of course to move forward without falling for provocations, without falling for moves that may be not the right moves in the right time, and without really forgetting that at the end of the day we are there in the middle of Europe. Our future is in Europe, and for sure with 3 NATO countries, among which Albania, in the Western Balkans. It's very, very important what we do. And then, of course, if we are clear about what we do, the rest is less preoccupying. This is my humble view.
Mm-hmm. And Prime Minister, you mentioned the word vulnerable. How vulnerable is your country right now?
The Western Balkans are vulnerable for several reasons. First of all, because we had a different history than the history of the other countries that already have joined the European Union. And speaking about Albania, Albania had a completely different history from everyone else because, yes, we had a communist regime, but we had a kind of communism that was uncomparable with the rest of the communist empire in Europe. So Albania was the North Korea of Europe, and we didn't have rockets, but we could go to jail because of Elton John. So we came from this very dark past, and here we are struggling to be part of the European Union, in a struggle that is becoming more and more complicated because of the European Union itself, and in the same time having to deal with third actors' influence, among which Russia is one. Not in Albania precisely, because in Albania we had them before, so we don't fall for this kind of friendship, but in other countries. And this makes the Western Balkans vulnerable, also because of the difference in economic terms with the rest of Europe. So that's why I think we need to understand that our destiny is first and foremost in our hands, and we need to work to make the region more and more focused on a common future, and to make sure that every neighbor and every neighborly relation becomes so important that no external factor can disrupt it. So it's more or less this what I had in mind when I spoke about vulnerability.
Thank you so much. And I want to get back to that question of vulnerability and the EU shortly. But to you, President Osmani, you want to become an EU member. You're waiting. Do you think what's happening in Ukraine could expedite that entry into the European Union and actually work in your favor? As Prime Minister Edi Rama was saying, you know, that vulnerability that is in the Western Balkans and that his country is seeing, could the EU say, okay, we need to protect them?
We certainly hope that the European Union will learn from this very painful experience, and that is that a Europe whole, free, and at peace. The European Union project in itself will never be complete without having the Western Balkans, but also countries like Ukraine, joining it. I believe it is very easy to see how a destabilized Western Balkans can actually destabilize the entire European continent, which is why the more peace in the Western Balkans, the more peace in the entire continent, but especially in the European Union, the more prosperity and stability in the Western Balkans, the more the European Union will be prosperous and will be able to deliver. But what we have seen, the countries of our region, is that no matter the amount of reforms, the EU is delivering very, very slowly so far. An NGO in our region has recently come up with an analysis of how much it would take our countries to join the EU if they would use the current path and, you know, the current EU fatigue. And the answer is around 60 years. So an entire lifetime for many people.
At this current
pace. So for that reason, I think that the very unfortunate events and the aggression in Ukraine and the invasion by Russia has actually united the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, and democratic and peace-loving nations around the world in a way that we haven't seen in decades. But that shouldn't stop them from also learning from the mistakes that were made towards countries of the Western Balkans, which is, if countries deliver on a merit-based process, if countries really carry out reforms, then the EU should deliver as well. For example, for more EU should deliver as well. For example, for more than 3.5 years, Kosovo has fulfilled each and every criteria for visa liberalization with the European Union. The European Commission made a positive recommendation. The European Parliament overwhelmingly voted with 2/3 to recommend visa liberalization for the citizens of Kosovo. But the Council has not voted in favor yet. So it is the concerns of very few within the European Union that have blocked Kosovo from a process for which it has fulfilled all of the criteria. So we have delivered, but the EU has not. And I believe that there is a growing number of voices, starting with the Chancellor of Germany, which is very encouraging, who are saying that we need to speed up the efforts to bring the Western Balkans closer.
So you're seeing that encouragement?
We are absolutely seeing this, especially among countries like Germany, to some extent, even some others that were the countries that really were insisting.
Because of Ukraine?
I believe so, because they understand how important it is to not leave the region fragile to external factors and to malign influence. And the only reason to achieve that is by making sure that our Euro-Atlantic path becomes a reality. In the case of Kosovo, not just European Union, but also NATO as a political and military organization that ultimately would have an obligation to achieve stability if in cases of attack. So these are extremely important also for the lives of our people. I mean, the new institutions in Kosovo are carrying out reforms at a record pace, not just because the EU is asking us to carry out these reforms, but also we believe that ultimately they are at the benefit of the people of Kosovo. Whether if we're talking about rule of law, standards of human rights, economy, creation of new jobs, and so on, these are all related to prosperity, and prosperity always leads to more peace and more stability in every region. So while we do understand, and rightly so, the eyes of the rest of the world, of all the world, are right now in Ukraine, I do hope that no one will lose sight from the fragility of the region and the necessity, which now has become an imperative, of our countries joining the European Union, and those of us who are not yet in NATO as well. Not just because we want to, because we deserve to be there, because we share the same values, and we shouldn't allow those who attack these values, countries like Russia, to stop us from joining these values-based systems that NATO and the European Union are.
And President, you mentioned 60 years at this current pace. Give us a time frame of hope that is not so long.
Look, I've been in politics for more than 20 years, and especially around the time when Kosovo was preparing to declare independence, declared independence, achieved recognitions from the majority of the world, joined international organizations. I've seen and heard so many pessimistic approaches, I've met so many politicians telling us it's impossible. It was possible. It was always possible. And as we always say, when there's a will, there's always a way. If there's the same kind of political will within the European Union, among the European leaders that we see right now in their unified voice towards Ukraine, I believe that they will see very fast reforms in our region, which are already happening in some of our countries, unfortunately not all, but especially in Kosovo right now. And this would really speed up and accelerate the process of joining these organizations. Now, in our case specifically, we're planning to apply for a candidate status by the end of the year. Obviously, then, for that decision, we will need the 4 non-recognizers to recognize Kosovo's independence. So let me take this opportunity to once again call upon these peace-loving countries to support Kosovo's candidate status, because it's ultimately not just for the best of Kosovo, it's for the best of the European Union as such, and it's for the best of the values that we share and we are commonly and collectively trying to protect. So if we would get the candidate status soon, obviously then it would also depend on us how quickly we fulfill the criteria, how quickly the negotiations move on. But as we see in the case of North Macedonia and Albania, sometimes even if our countries deliver, not necessarily do we see the EU delivering as fast as the people of our countries deserve.
Thank you so much. And why is there that difference, Prime Minister Edi Rama? There is hope coming here, from the President of Kosovo, and you mentioned the EU in the way that it is right now. It's a struggle. Why do you feel that struggle to enter, to get that EU membership?
Listen, I hope that what is happening nowadays will serve in some ways to bring some light and to bring some sense of awareness among the EU countries, and especially the big EU countries, which haven't seen a war in their lifetime. I mean, the generation that leads today the European Union hadn't seen a war, and at the same time, for them, it has become more and more a problem to deal with their own public opinions. It has become more and more a challenge to face the waves of populism, of far right, than to go forward with the European project. So what the founding fathers imagined and drafted as a common house has been somehow lost in the translation of the never-ending paragraphs of the EU bureaucracy. And as far as Albania is concerned, and as far as myself I'm concerned, I believe that we have to keep going with the reforms, and we have to keep pushing to make our country European states based in the same principles and values and operating the same standards of the European Union, not because people in or Brussels or in Paris or in Berlin are asking us, but because this is what we owe to our children. On the other hand, when the European Union will formalize this process is not up to us, and frankly, by following their own words, by following their own written commitments, we have prepared for the wedding several times. And the bride didn't show up. So now we are not going to prepare anymore for the wedding. We are going to work, and we are there. And when they would like to marry, we'll be ready to marry. So it will not take any moment of hesitation. But no more preparation with orchestra, with suites, with speeches, because they are not able to deliver on their promises. This is very, very clear. Maybe, just maybe, the crisis in the heart of Europe now, with this never imagined until a few weeks ago military aggression towards a democratic country, will somehow wake them up and will give them some sense of the need to forge the peace every day without taking it for granted, and maybe their geopolitics will become more sensitive and more sensible by understanding that the Western Balkans, it's much better to be inside than to be left in the outskirts of Europe. It's an area where a world war has started. It's an area where, as we said before, there are vulnerabilities. It's an area where third actors try to get their own space to make their own disruptions of the European project. But it's also an area where there is a huge support for the European Union project. So Albanians are the most pro-European people in the region, and maybe even more pro-European today than French. But, you know, if this is not enough for EU, there is no problem for us. We'll continue to do our work, and we will, as I said, we will focus much more on the region. We will take care much more of our own region, because it's there that we need to keep as much as we can whatever we have achieved until now, and to make more progress in achieving final peace among all countries, so the 6 Western Balkan countries be recognized, be respected, and be in their place. Then the rest, it's not up to us, frankly. And if this war will not be enough, then I don't know what should be next to really pass the message to the big guys in Europe that make decisions that they can't keep going in this way, by promising and then not delivering, by promising and then not delivering, because the world is more and more complicated, and lack of leadership, lack of strategy, lack of courage to build upon the project of the founding fathers can be at the end, can result at the end with a very, very high price. And I wish this will not be the case.
Indeed, we hope and pray for that. Thank you so much. I like the analogy you used of a wedding and the bride not turning up. It's,
have you ever experienced the wait to be married and the groom to not come?
Not yet. No, I hope not. I hope.
Believe me, it's frustrating.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I want to go to you, President of Sierra Leone. The President of Turkey, President Erdogan, said earlier, Ukraine has been left alone by the international community. As we come out, I hope we're coming out of this pandemic, all of us, when I see that statistic that only 10% of Africans are vaccinated, how alone does the continent feel?
It's always been like that. Again, because of media bias, that's why we don't get the story correct out here. But it's always been like that. I said it, I said, We have always been at the receiving end. When COVID came, it was not picking and choosing, but then when we had the vaccination for it, we are cherry picking where to put the vaccinations. So luckily, we are made strong, and we have been able to survive it for the most part.
But what hope does it give you that the world hasn't come together for a global pandemic? How can it come together, do you think, then, for Europe, for the other countries that are fragile? Just that notion of the international community letting down some parts of the world.
Well, at a time when we should be together and act together, think and act together, we have chosen as a world to be very selfish. That is how we see it. On a lot of occasions, actually, Africa has felt that way. And we are not surprised that for serious issues that concern our survival, that we could be treated that way. I think the world has to be a fairer place, a fair international system that can consider the world as a unit, especially with the advent of technology. We are able to move and interact at a pace that was not definitely possible a few decades back, which means that challenges or problems, be it pandemics, war, terrorism that exist anywhere in the world, can actually get to another part around the world in a day or two. So if we really are genuine about resolving conflicts, threats to security, pandemics, then we have to treat the world as a unit, a village today, so that when there are challenges anywhere, we put our heads together as a world and actually approach it that way and deal with the nip it in the bud there. Because when we don't nip it in the bud, it gets to spread very quickly. And that was how COVID came. We are talking about Ukraine. It's between two countries at the moment. But look at how many nations are involved. Look at how many, the ramification, economic ramification, already supply chain disruptions. We are causing inflationary trends in Africa and all around the world. Where you add this situation to it, it's going to be extremely difficult, and it has the possibility of creating instability, because in Africa, where we have a lot of unemployment, and then there's going to be an exponential increase in the prices of essential commodities, we have a challenge on our hands. And this is against the backdrop of threat of terrorism. So these are totally unconnected. We are not in Europe. But what has happened here, if not quickly handled with care, it's going to have a major impact on us, like other countries around the world. Energy prices going up now, everywhere. So no problem anywhere in the world should be treated in isolation. We should treat every challenge because of the level of interconnectedness, thanks to technology and the quantum leap in technology. We are so interlinked, and yet we feel so isolated that we are not going to be able to deal with most of these evolving and emerging challenges. We have to be fair as an international system. We have to create an international system that genuinely considers the views. Sovereignty, of course, comes to play, but we can still work together and protect the sovereignty or respect the sovereignty of other nations. But I think the idea that we can leave nations to deal with their own challenges individually does not work today. It is much easier, it's much cheaper than wait until it spills over and then we start to scramble to go there.
And one of my guests this morning in my ADF talk said the attack on Ukraine was a failure of diplomacy. Do you think we need new structures for diplomacy for Africa internationally?
Well, there's quite a lot, maybe I add to diplomacy dialogue. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a great phenomenon, dialogue and diplomacy. Some of the challenges can be easily dealt with, but because we do not dialogue enough, because of differences, because we've created so much space between potential hostile nations, the problems are left to fester. And by the time we get to really intervene or know about them, they have already created massive situations that are beyond our reach. So diplomacy, yes, there is a limit to it, as we all know, but I think constructive dialogue among us and as equal partners in a fair international system can help us quite a lot to deal with some of the challenges presently confronting different parts of the world.
Thank you so much. I want to go to you, to the President of Kosovo. What hope do you give your citizens right now as fuel prices rise, as food prices rise as well, to really feel that despair coming out of a pandemic? We suddenly had some hope, and now there's instability again. What do you tell your citizens?
Well, these are very difficult times, as previously mentioned. The war has had its toll also on the economy around the world, and for many quicker than expected. So the gas prices are high, and so are food prices, and they're higher than before in a matter of days, which is why, rightly so, there is growing concern among the citizens. Obviously, the best answer in these circumstances is action. Action that a country can undertake to make sure that it has enough food reserves, enough oil reserves, that it cooperates with other countries in the region and beyond to make sure that we help each other during these difficult times. And then once the citizens see that you're undertaking all of the measures, obviously the level of panic goes down. So not always can you do everything alone within the capacities that you have, especially if you're a small country with quite a lot of economic difficulties inherited from the past or inherited because of the pandemic, which is why in these times when we collectively deal with these challenges, I believe that a collective approach to also face the challenges is extremely important. So whether we're talking about when we faced the pandemic, how important it was to help one another with vaccines, or how important it was for many of us to receive the necessary economic support to deal with the economic ramifications of the pandemic. And now, similarly, the economic consequences of the war in Ukraine. In all of these circumstances, we understand that alone, no one can make it. And together we can definitely do better. Together we can bring more prosperity, and that leads to more stability and to more peace. So while we are really dealing with very difficult challenges when it comes to prices that are going up every single day, I believe that one, doing everything in your capacities internally as a country to make sure that all measures are undertaken, but two, understanding that you can never do it alone, and you will need to communicate, you will need to lend a helping hand if you can, but also look for a helping hand when you need it, are the key to passing these very difficult situations. It doesn't mean that it's going to be over soon. I mean, you were asking earlier whether this what happened in Ukraine, and I call it by its name, it's a war. It's not just an attack, it's a war. It's an aggression against a sovereign and democratic country. Whether it was a failure of diplomacy, but I think it's much more than that. It was the failure of the democratic world to understand that appeasement of despots, appeasement of hegemonic regimes can never lead to more peace. We need to learn that lesson from history. Back in the early 90s, many tried to appease Milosevic, the butcher of the Balkans. We know what it led to. It led to hundreds of thousands of civilian lives lost. It led to tens of thousands of women raped. It led to millions of people becoming refugees. So the guy who was appeased in the early 90s was the guy who waged all of the wars. And I think it should have been understood about Putin as well, where he's leading his region, but where he wants to lead the world too. So speaking in clear language and taking clear action very early on towards those that instead of peace contribute to war, they start with warmongering and they continue with real war, is a key to achieving long-lasting peace in all regions around the world. And that's why, especially now, we're hoping that this lesson has been learned to at least some extent, at least to a larger number, for a larger number of countries than before, so that more can contribute to preserving peace elsewhere, but also helping for prosperity elsewhere. Now that we're dealing with the economic difficulties, obviously we're talking to partners because they are very much also committed, both the European Union and other international organizations, they are committed to obviously helping Ukraine economically, helping the countries around Ukraine because of the large number of refugees that they are receiving, but also hopefully helping many of us that have immediately and swiftly issued sanctions fully aligned with the European Union and the United States towards Russia to deal with the economic ramifications and the consequences of this war. So unless we work together to deal with the consequences, obviously the results will not be good. But again, as I said at the beginning, it is very encouraging to see the unified approach of the EU and many world leaders, and hopefully that will continue, not just on the security front, but also on the economic front.
Thank you, President. And that question to you also, Prime Minister Edi Rama, food prices are going up, fuel prices are going up too. It's hitting people, your citizens, hard as everywhere else. What do you tell them to believe in this, that there is a pathway to peace and prosperity as they come out of what has been 2-3 very difficult years because of a pandemic?
First of all, we live in times when you are a politician and you say things, even if you say it's, I don't know, 6 o'clock, and it is 6 o'clock, people have a suspicion that maybe it's not 6 o'clock. So it's a time when even the obvious has become difficult to be accepted as such, let alone when we are in face of the very first consequences of a war. This is a war. This is not a Netflix documentary. This is not a film. This is a real war, and while we are here speaking about it, there are thousands and dozens of thousands of women, of children that are in movement to get out of their cities under shelling, to get out of their country. And there are men and boys that have to stay, to fight, and put their life in line. So we have decided to be part of it. NATO has decided to be part of it. Also other countries, non-NATO countries, have decided to be part of it by joining the sanctions. But also countries very far away that haven't decided to be part of it are feeling the heat, are feeling the first consequences in the form of the high prices and it will be very, very, it will be very defining for this war, the limit of patience of the people in that side that are in support of Ukraine but are not directly involved, and that follow the war but still in a screen, and that don't feel the noise of the bombs, don't feel the pain of the destruction. How much these people will be able to endure the pain of the prices and of an economy that, of course, it will not be in its best, to say it euphemistically. And when our friend from Africa was speaking about the immediate effect seen in all African countries, so in a completely different continent, since the war started, with the prices going up, you realize again that the world has become very small, and there is nothing that happens somewhere that is not connected to somewhere else. Like the pandemic, now we have this war, and in parallel with this war, we have a new pandemic, which is the energy crisis. And we are very far from seeing the end of it, with or without war, because let me remind you that the energy crisis started before. So the symptoms of the energy crisis were seen months before the war. And of course, the direct involvement of Russia in a war as an aggressor brought the energy crisis in another level. But the energy crisis was there in the form of lack of supply. So what's next will be very difficult to live with, and there is not much to say but to simply try and get the facts right, because we can be divided on opinions, but we cannot be divided on facts. And this is another problem of our time, that many parties, I mean groups, even countries or even people have different facts, and that's why it's difficult to find a common ground. The fact is that we are part of a war, the fact is that the war is affecting us, and the fact is that if we want our values, our principles, our standards, our way of life to prevail, we have to be ready to pay our part of the cost. It cannot be possible that on one hand we want all this to prevail, not just Ukraine, but what Ukraine represents, and on the other hand we cannot endure the pain. Of course, it's a totally different pain. It's far more acceptable than the pain of the Ukrainians, but it's still something painful. After a pandemic, as you said, we were seeing recovery, we were seeing a big jump forward as a world, and now we go back in something which is even, for some aspects, more gloomy than the pandemic itself. So this is a test, I think. This is a test for our own character and for our own beliefs and for our own capacity to stand independently from the cost. So, and everybody has to understand, and we have to explain that this is not about just the countries that have been involved or just the countries that put sanctions. Everyone, with or with no sanctions, has today a problem. And we are seeing again the same thing that we saw with the pandemic, how countries ran away and closed themselves just inside. You spoke about the vaccination in Africa. Now, I am not African, okay? And I happen to be white, so I can say it. It's racism. It's just racism. And there is not much to say. It's pure racism. Of course, in a very implicit form, of course, but how you explain it? How you explain what is happening with the poor Nigerians in the border, trying to get out. And we just wrote to the Nigerian authorities. We said, let them come to Albania, because it's offensive to our own self, to our own tradition, to our own children, to see this separation. So what about Afghanistan? What about these people? What about these people that were told, we are coming there to bring you democracy, to bring you peace, to bring you prosperity, to bring you rock and roll, and then suddenly we left them worse than they were 20 years ago, because this time we left them fully exposed. We left them fully exposed, like the collaborators of the occupant. And they have now to deal with life and death. So, and I really feel shame when people say, oh, Albania, you did so great. You opened your door, you did something fascinating. This is terrible. If this is fascinating, it means that it's terrible, because this should be the norm. This should be not fascinating. This should be what every country should do. So, anyhow, the great thing about leading countries like Albania is that at the end you can speak your mind, because you don't have to take the big decisions, you know. And no matter the others think, who cares? The truth is very, very important, and we need to deal with the truth, with the truth, with the truth. We cannot just hide behind very complicated stuff, you know. 10% vaccination because it's racism, that's it. There is no other explanation.
Thank you so much for being so truthful, for really speaking so clearly and so bluntly. It is refreshing, it really is. We are running out of time, and it really is 12 minutes past 6 right now. I want to give the final word, if I may, to you, to the President of Sierra Leone. What message of hope could you give? Things are so difficult right now, but if you could maybe give us a message of hope that there is some way, a path to peace, prosperity in the world we are living in right now.
I think various speakers have alluded to this, that we are in this together. There is no way, be it white or black, whichever continent you find yourself in, we are in this together. Whatever happens on one continent affects the rest of the world. So it is high time we started to think multilaterally rather than individually. We should be able to look at world's challenges with a vision that it is only when we get together, think together, and act together.
But don't we have the UN? Don't we have the WHO? Sorry to interrupt, but these are multilateral organizations there.
But you know what we did to the WHO? We don't give them the necessary support that they need to be able to influence things around the world. The UN is a toothless bulldog. Toothless bulldog? Toothless.
Okay. The
yes.
UN is a toothless bulldog.
Yes. What they do is, you know, I pity our Secretary General, who goes on, you know, frustratingly. He wants to solve the problem. He doesn't have the power. So, like President Erdogan said this morning or early afternoon, 5 countries, irrespective of what we all say in the world, can bring that to naught with just the veto power. So if they are the ones, the antagonists, then we are in a very serious situation like this one. What do? We are shouting, we are supplying, we want to be part of the solution. But then, it's only, I think that we are meeting this afternoon at the UN Security Council, I don't know what the outcome is, but I know, I'm sure it is obvious to us all that it's not just going to take one nation to say, I veto any move. And that's the end. So our intentions are there. I can see the world supporting Ukraine. But we see the children, we see old people, people who are just going about their own, livelihood, to get livelihood. Look at how they're suffering. We want to be part of, it is not necessary to go through this sort of trauma. We have had to go through all of this. But I think if we have to live here with anything optimistic,
yes,
it's just to say that we can still act as one, as a world that cares for everybody and not some people. And when we do that, we can have a better world.
Thank you so much. I just have one more minute, and I would like, if I could, use that minute for you, Prime Minister, President, of Kosovo. A minute of hope, if you could give us that.
I've seen hope. I've also seen desperation and lots of suffering. As a former refugee myself and representing a people that had to go through genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity, we had seen hope starting the 24th of March 1999 when the world got together to stop the genocide that was ongoing in Kosovo. Mm-hmm. I've seen it then, so I believe that we can see it again. The democratic world saved our lives. It could not turn their backs nor their eyes to the suffering of the people of Kosovo. And I do hope that they will do the same elsewhere in the world. Because after all, a world where the people suffer from wars, from hunger, from other kinds of destructions, it's never a world where we can see either prosperity or economic development or a perspective for the young generations. So helping each other during dire times, it's a precondition to also being good at home. And of course, I'm very hopeful that the more unified this response for Ukraine, but also for other places where we see wars and conflicts in the world, the more peace we will see in the globe in total.
Thank you so much. So beautifully put. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our guests once again, the President of Kosovo, Vjosa Osmani, the President of Sierra Leone, Julius Maada Bio, and Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rama. Thank you all so much. And thank you, our audience, for being such a great audience and for being with us here today. Thank you all.